Don't do that. This time you don't have the guy running the bobcat.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's scooping out snow.
Rochester has an interesting way of dealing with snow, but piling it in the middle of the street.
Yeah.
They create a nice.
Yeah.
Something else comes and scoops it up.
Yeah, I mean, it's smart. I mean,
There's one time it snowed in Rochester, so we started to figure it out.
No, in Minneapolis, they just like.
pour it all on the sidewalks, you know. So
There's no eventual way for it to go.
right, right. So no, that's brilliant.
We're turning out.
Oh, no way.
But now I can do that too.
Unlike a little kid.
I have a pattern as well.
That's my luck. That's my birthday. I know.
We have an upgrade of epic community first. I'm wondering what facility related Armageddon project is like.
Yes, thank you.
Well, they are.
Oh, you mean black, right?
Blackwater.
Blackwater. What was that?
No, Blackwater. It's literally called the Fun Project.
Are you here all week?
Yeah.
I'm hoping we're past Colorado.
No.
Next week is supposed to be cold.
Well, tonight is your yesterday is, I think, yeah.
February upgrade? Somebody was asking in a meeting I was in, it all depends on when Mayo's affecting the May upgrade, like, isn't that what's coming in May? No. February upgrade is coming. May upgrade.
There's some interesting questions that get asked in the future portion of ethics that I think may not be as relevant now, but certainly will be more relevant as we move into the future, particularly around gender. And so there's questions about how do you identify your gender currently, and then what was your gender assigned at birth?
Yeah.
You know, I think the nuance of this question is
There was a patient who must have been filled out incorrectly on the app, where he was listed as transgender, and he was not, and it really emotionally 70-year-old man. And so I just sort of brought it up to me.
yeah.
Or it was a computer glitch, or a sort of a new epiphany.
70 years.
70 years. Or was it like progressive?
Yeah.
Yeah, computer glitch. Then he was like, oh, now I get all the new questions I've been getting.
Yeah, I think it might be, it might behoove us at some point to do some patient education around even how to fill out some of those forms, even if it's just a video on a kiosk somewhere or something we send out to patients before they fill the stuff out to kind of let them know what the new lingo is. Right. Good.
Well, I think the really clinical assistance boxes, we would have to, how to ask.
Well, we want to get very offended when you have questions like that. Being from somewhere that what your gender is, what your gender first was.
I say,
Oh, yeah.
routine. But there have been several instances recently where, it was put in, and then people get providers who follow, like, do, and because they, refuse to pay for. Yeah, I don't think they usually just pay for, yeah, they said, I told them, just put it in the system. I think it is important.
And I wonder, like, as gender becomes less important in a society, how as providers we address that, given the fact that some of the biology hasn't necessarily, or the way medicines have been invaded or tested. There's some physiological things that we have to be mindful of if we want to.
We can't try to really think about it.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, those are things that, and even OBGYN, right? So what is that? So what's the difference between women's health and then functions like that? So like, how do we make sure we serve people well, given the nuances of some of the physiological things that we have to take into account?
So I think you come up with your second session when you have to come back. We're gonna go ahead and get started. There might be, I think Dr. Cia is coming from downtown and she got our shuttle driver, the guy that doesn't know that you need to start when I get on the shuttle. Anyway, so she's coming. But well, they should know a little late. I'm late, so let's go. Thank you so much for coming. We've had one session last week. This is our second of these sessions. We're trying something new. So this is on behalf of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and we're just always looking for what's something new that we can try just to start some conversation so people don't have, oh gosh, we're gonna go get a presentation on diversity and what's that mean and all that. We really just want to start really incorporating it so that we're looking at it from an inclusion. What makes us the same? What are some commonalities, not always looking at what makes us different? And how do we weave this in to our everyday, work life when we're all here? So I will send out an email. I know we've all been over surveyed to death, but we really are interested in the feedback. This is something new. And so we're curious to hear what you thought of it and what your other ideas are. As I said in our first session, thank heavens we don't have to be masters of everything, and we can rely on wonderful colleagues like Andre that will come and help us. Hi, Dr. Hood. Come on, just get started. Andre is from the Office of Diversity Inclusion here within Human Resources in Rochester. He's actually a program director, and he's a little chief with bio. And he has graciously offered to help us take these things off and start the conversation. We had a great session on Friday. I know, I get all worried when somebody puts something in front of me. Oh, they're gonna make me do something, and I talk to people, and I was participating, and it makes me a little nervous. It was really fun. We had a really good time, and we really enjoyed it. So I'm hoping that you all will enjoy it as well. But just a few notes, Andre, and I think you'll find this immediately. Andre Koen is a very energetic presenter, a powerful communicator, and a dynamic teacher. There are many words that describe him. A few that have been used is Andre, the enkindled spirit. For the last 15 years, Andre has been a diversity trainer in Minnesota. His time as a K-12 classroom teacher and an affirmative action officer in college faculty has given him a solid platform for looking at diversity inclusion in new and different ways. So many of his clients included professionals needing continuing education credits, and now we're fortunate enough to have him helping us here as a colleague here at Middle. So with that, I'm going to stop talking. He's got a lot of stuff to go over with you.
Thank you. So, so what I will say is, if you have some nervousness about me presenting or whatnot, don't worry about me. I taught middle school, so I'm good. There's nothing you can do that I haven't already kind of worked through. So, so we came to have a conversation on diversity and inclusion. I have an agenda, and I actually do have a PowerPoint slide. I prefer not to use that because I'd rather spend our time having some conversations. It will be made available to you, so there's nothing there there's nothing top secret that you can't see or whatnot. But I'm also curious as you were kind of walking into the room, you selected this session, and I want to say thank you so much for selecting this session, because you could have been doing other things in other places with your time and your energy, but you chose to come here. So first of all, I want to honor you and say thank you for that. Secondly, what were some of the things you were hoping that we might talk about, or things that you wanted to talk about, given the topic, given the nature of talking about diversity and inclusion? What were you hoping, or what would you like to talk about around that topic? No. What's that?
Increasing curiosity.
So how do we increase curiosity? Okay.
For me, it was just important that the enterprise were having this conversation, because I think providers across the board are nervousness with this. Makes it hard for us to connect.
Okay.
Even if we are skilled in the medical department, not talking about it, not just about our treatment, just cross-boarding.
Okay. Cool. Yes.
So I think diversity and inclusion are perfect partners, but I think they need to be attacked, so to speak, at separate levels. I think diversity needs to be looked at more of a structural or structural level, and what I'm really hoping to get a lot of today is inclusion. Because I think diversity without inclusion is useless. And what we can came up every day at Mayo for patients and for our coworkers. And that's where I think a lot of our learning is. Diversity will come with planning and organization with similar identity. from the provider down to, the desk operating specialist, the same. Your provider or a nurse or the desk, everyone is treated the same. The role
Okay.
Yeah, you can have a role model.
Okay.
I'm not being top down to just because you're the best employee or.
Yeah. So, and we'll tease out this idea of sameness, because I'm not sure that's exactly what we're after. And hopefully during the presentation, you'll see why, and hopefully I can give some languages and tips to kind of think about that in a more strategic way that actually may get us to what we want to get to, right? So, and this is what I mean. So I'll go ahead and just give you, this is what I mean by that, right? So I just had my checkup, and it's public information, so I'm not concerned. I am 49 years old, and so the doctor said something that was very strange to me. He said, "You're now at the age where dot, 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 dot." And I'm like, what are you talking about? I've never been at the age when, right? So he suggests some tests and some things we should look at, and so I'm laughing and smiling because I'm an ODI, right? So I'm the diversity guy and whatnot, and so he says, yeah, we are thinking that we should probably start looking at these tests and that thing and this other thing. And I said, well, sir, I just want to let you know something that's important for you to recognize about it. And he said, pray tell, what is it? And I said, I'm African American. And he chuckled, right? And I said, so the battery, the things that you want to do, does that apply to African Americans the same way that it applies to other people? And he said, let me go check. So he leaves the room, he checks with whoever he needed to check with, and he came back, and I think he punished me for asking that question, because he said, for everyone else, that's at age 50, but for you, we have to do it immediately, right? So but for African, what's that? Right. We get it in two, right? So if I was being treated the same, I may have missed an opportunity, or we may have missed something that actually could have been beneficial. So I'm not quite sure that sameness is what we're after, but I hear the intention of what you're after. Hopefully we can tease that out in today's session. All right. Other things that people were hoping or would like to talk about, given the 40 minutes that we have left. 55 minutes we have left. All right. Were there any things you were hoping we would not talk about? Like if we talk about this thing one more time, my head will explode. I can't deal with this anymore. Anything like that? Going once, going twice. So, okay, politics. All right. You guys didn't say anything, so no. It starts with a T. Okay. Terrific. Okay. So let's get started. So I want this to be a participatory time. Does everyone have something to write with? A pen. So if you can, if you don't have a pen, I have a couple of markers up here that will suffice. If you have an extra for your neighbor or your friend, that would be wonderful. So on your handout, on the cover of your handout, you'll find 5 gray circles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What I would like for you to do is to write down one thing that you value or that is important to you. One thing that is of value or importance to you in each one of those circles. It doesn't have to be a deep dive, it can just be word association. Okay? So one thing that you value or that is important to you in each one of those circles.
fill out all five.
Yep, so one in each of those circles.
This big one seems very important. Does it matter how we order this?
Well, if you want to use the big one, you can, but I was going to save that for another
Okay,
activity.
there's four.
So- Yep, so the 5 dark gray circles.
There are 4.
There are five. There are five. Let's look at the big one. 4, 5.
I'm gonna take.
That means I
better get.
Wow, that was fast.
I'm gonna back up service.
I
Yeah.
Is the dress blue and black or
Oh,
white and
no.
gold, right?
Wow, is that what?
All right, so most people should have 4, if not all 5. What I'd like to do now is play a game, and the game is very simple. What I want you to do is to find 2 people for each one of the things that you wrote down. And once you find these individuals, I want you to find people who either agree with what you have on your paper and they say, wow, that's a really good idea, or they have something similar to what you have on their paper, right? So if I wrote down my son and someone else wrote down their grandfather, that's family, that's close enough, right? Or if someone else wrote down justice and I think that's really cool, I will sign that. So I want you to find 2 people for each one, and I want them to put their signature next to the thing that you share, that you have in common. All right? So I want you to find 2 people for each one, which means you should have a minimum of how many people? Don't start yet. I'm going to give everybody the same opportunity.
We're gonna see this 4-6
So it's 5. There are 5 circles. If you get 2 for each one, you should have a minimum of how many? 10. You should have a minimum of 10. 2 for each one. All right? You have 90 seconds to do this, starting now.
Honestly.
60 seconds.
Family? Okay. I know. How's that going? Andre, you need to say? I wish I would have done that.
Not like,
Oh my God. My God.
Next side.
Yes, dear. Serenity is awesome, and I should value that more.
30 seconds.
Literally, nothing, nobody.
Five, four, three, two, one, and game over. Game over. So please count up the number of signatures that you have. Duplicates do count. So we're going for the gross. So was there anyone that was at least able to get 4 signatures? Please raise your hand. Okay. All right. Cool. Were there any folks who were able to get 7 signatures? All right. Was there anyone able to get 10 signatures? All right. Cool. Anyone who got over 10 signatures? Okay, you have 11 signatures. You have 12. All right. 12.
Overachiever.
Yes, let's give her a hand. Thank you for ruining the grading curve. We appreciate that. So, as you were walking around the room, were there things you saw on other people's papers and you were like, man, why am I thinking that? I value that too. What were some things you saw on other people's papers and you were like, I should have wrote that down on mine?
Wittiness.
Wittiness. All right. What else?
Nature.
Nature.
Health.
Health. Justice. Education. Right? So these were all things we saw in other people's papers, and we were like, we should have wrote that down. As you were going around the room, were there things that were more difficult to have people sign on, or you actually didn't get anybody to sign on one of your things? Yes.
Liberty.
Liberty
Is valuable.
is valuable to you. It's valuable to you. So please raise your hand if you value liberty, even if it wasn't written on your paper. All right, cool. Yes. There was a hand over here. Happiness. Please raise your hand if you value happiness, even if you didn't write it down. All right, cool. One more. Education. All right, cool. Please raise your hand if you value education.
Knowledge is kind of.
Yeah, knowledge could be equated with education, right? Cool. So, what do you think was the goal of this activity? Like, why would I start out a session with this particular activity? What's that? To get us to move. All right. So we can all see that we have the same values, or we have similar values, right? Why else might we do this exercise?
We also
have different values, right? So one of the things that, particularly in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, that we're really trying to drive home, that we want people to think about, is the fact that we have a new or expanded definition of diversity, which is diversity is honoring and recognizing our commonalities and our differences simultaneously, right? So we recognize our commonalities and our differences simultaneously. An example would be these shapes, right? So in what ways are these shapes similar? So they're two-dimensional, right? So they have length and they have a height. They're all green, right? In what ways are they also different?
The patterns.
So the patterns in their shading are different. How else are they different? So the shapes, in fact, themselves are different, right? So there's diversity there. So when we talk about this idea of diversity, what we want to have people think about is that it is about our commonalities and our differences simultaneously. There are things about us that are universal, right? What are some universal human things?
Everyone has family.
So everybody has family, right?
All things considered. What else is universally human? To be heard. Heard. To be heard. Now we have a need to be heard. Yep. We've also, we've been hurt as well. And sometimes we've been, sometimes we've been the heartbreaker, I'm just saying. But in all things modesty. So there are some things that we as human beings, we need food, we need water, we need air to survive. Those things are universal. However, from our context, where we come from, how we get those things may be very different, or what those things mean to us may be very different. And so when we think about diversity, it is recognizing and honoring our commonalities and our differences. All right. So I have some follow-up questions because I've done this often enough to started to see some patterns, and I'm wondering if some of these patterns hold true for you as well. Right? So as you're looking at those circles or those values, did anyone write down anything that would indicate their racial or ethnic background? So out of those 5 circles, is there any one thing that I could point to them and say, oh, they're of this racial or this ethnic background? All right, so most people are shaking their heads, All right. Is there any one thing that I can point to or that you can point to that you wrote down that would identify your gender identity or gender expression? Is there one particular thing that would identify? Okay, cool. For this one, I want you to jump up in the air and wave your hands like you don't care. Is there anything there that would suggest your IRS tax bracket? That I can point to and say, this is my IRS. No? Okay. So I find it interesting. So you wrote down things, but none of those things pointed to your race or your ethnic identity, your gender or gender identity or gender expression, or your socioeconomic status, right? So your tax bracket, your socioeconomic status. Why do you think that is? Why did because you have a tax bracket, you have some kind of gender identity, you have some kind of ethnic or racial component to your life. Why do you think those things didn't show up as one of the 5 things that you value?
So these are human values, they're not racial or gender-based values, these are value of human core values.
Yeah, so these are core human values or values to the core of humanity. Okay, why else?
We're all basically the same, that gender and race is not really differentiated that much.
Okay, so our similarities are so much that we don't necessarily differentiate with those racial or gender tropes. Yes?
Those things are not in our top 5 things.
Because you are smart. Those things didn't show up because you're smart. What did I ask you to do?
No,
You are, right? What did I ask you? What was the task? Write down 5 things that you value. And so what I will submit to you is directly to your point. You wrote down the things that are of value to you, and I would suggest to you that those things like our gender identity or gender expression or gender roles, our racial or ethnic identity, our socioeconomic status is not as important to us as it is to the systems that want to have us engage with them, right? So, and this is a way that I like to think about this. So, I was not born black. I know for some of you here, like, don't be concerned, it's not a reverse Michael Jackson thing. I'm okay, right? So in 1970, I was born in Dayton, Ohio, and there was many of us are familiar, like, it was before Epic, right? So you just had pencil and paper, and then take the vitals down. And the nurse asked, she had 3 questions on her questionnaire that changed, or 3 categories that changed my life forever. It was on the category of race. In Dayton, Ohio, in 1970, there were 3 choices for race: black, white, and other. So she looks at me, she looks at my parents, she looks at her list, she looks at me, she looks at my parents, she looks at her list, and she makes her decision. And what decision do you think the nurse made? Black. But here's the question, and I think you started to tease that as we're going into this intro. What was I before she assigned me something? I was born human, but America made me black.
There you go.
If I was born in the Dominican Republic, I would be different. If I was born in Puerto Rico, I'd be different. If I was born in Spain, I'd be different. If I was born in Norway, I would be a different racial category than what was on that list. And so even when we think about this concept of race, and one thing I'll say is sometimes you'll hear people say that race is not real. And I want to suggest that it is very real. It's just not what we think that it is. Right? It's not biological. It is not even sociological. So some people like to say, race is a social construct. What I'd like to offer you is that race is a tool used by governments to govern their people. Race is used by governments to govern their people, right? As an example, there are no Hispanics in Mexico. There are no Hispanics in Mexico. When do they become Hispanics? When they come to the United States, right? And so this idea of race is an artificial government construct. Racial and ethnic categories in the United States are very different than the ones in Canada. We're in the same hemisphere. Shouldn't they be the same? A Ford F-150 any place on the planet is what? A Ford F-150, is familiar with the truck?
When you try to move one from Canada to the US, they're actually different. One's diesel, one has a different kilometers per mile. You can't even move an F-150 from Canada to the US.
But all things considered, it's still considered.
It's a truck.
It's still an
They wouldn't let you
F-150.
bring it into the US because it's built different.
Okay. But all things considered, it's still a truck, right? And so when we think about moving races around the planet, we recognize that our racial definitions change from place to place, right? So there are Spanish people who are white in Spain, but they're Hispanic when they come to the United States. Right? So just as an example. So cool. So let's do this. That large circle. Let's get to that large circle. And that large circle is the circle of all human knowledge. Okay, all right, it's a little extreme. But let's call this the pie of all human knowledge. And what I want you to do is cut yourself a piece of pie the size of what you know of everything there is to know. All right? So all history, all math, all science, all languages, all religions, all natural sciences are all wrapped up in this.
You won't see it on your screen.
Okay.
It'd be a line.
It would be a line, okay? So humor me and make some kind of mark on that, right? Of how much you know of everything that there is to know. So some folks may say it's a dot, it's a sliver, it's a line, all right? So what are some things that you know for sure? What are some things you know for sure? 3 things you know for sure.
Gravity.
All right, gravity. You know gravity and the laws of physics, all right?
Infectious disease.
Okay, you know about infectious diseases. One more. Some of the infectious diseases. One more thing.
Some slivers of history.
All right, so you know some slivers of history. All right, so those are 3 things that you know. So what I'd like for you to do next is I want you to cut yourself a piece of pie relative to the size of what you are aware of that you do not know. So you know you don't know. So for example, I know that I don't know Mandarin Chinese. I know that I don't know how to fly an airplane. And I also know that I should discontinue doing lobotomies. Oh, you got the joke. So, what are some things that you know you don't know? Now, some people will say that's the rest of the pie. I want to challenge you to try to quantify that because we'll have a third piece of pie that will also be used. All right? So I want you to quantify the second piece of pie, the size of what you know you don't know. You are aware of the fact that you don't know. All right? Now, is that the same size as what you know, or is it a different size? It's bigger, all right? And in some cases, at least in my case, it'll be way bigger, right? So there's so much more things that I don't know. What are some examples of things that people know they don't know? What's that? Chinese, all right? Two more things.
All the bugs that are actually present in the world.
Okay, so all the bugs that are present in the world. One more thing that you know you don't know. A cure for HIV, right? So those are things that, so we've talked about what we know, we've talked about what we know we don't know, and what do you think the third piece of pie is?
What you don't know, you don't even know, you don't know.
What you don't know you don't know, or we'll call that a blind spot. So if you can break those words in that piece, blind spot. Blind spot. So we have what we know, we have what we know we don't know, and we have our blind spot. If we put those three things together, we might call that our paradigm. So if you can write that next to the circle somewhere, paradigm. Paradigm. I used to say paradigm because I was hooked on phonics. It worked for me.
This you hate one.
Right? So paradigm. All right. So since you know how to spell paradigm, what is a paradigm?
Don't put me on the I know, I'm like the girl. Don't volunteer.
So
I
a
didn't volunteer,
paradigm.
I just burst out.
Anyone ever heard someone talk about a paradigm shift? We need to shift the paradigm. What are they talking about? What's the context clues for them saying we need to shift this paradigm? So it's a framework, right? Or beliefs, right? A perspective. The way I like to talk about it is a paradigm is simply the way you see the world. And the way you see the world will determine what it is that you see. All right? So whose responsibility was to give us our first set of paradigms? Our parents, our family, our caretakers, right? And where did our caretakers and our parents get their paradigm? From their parents. And where did those people get theirs from their parents? Has anyone ever received a copy of 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 a copy?
Yeah.
After it's been copied, 5 or 6 generations, does that copy look exactly like the original? No. How is it different? So it gets fuzzy. How else is it different? It's got additional spots on it, right? So hairs and all sorts of fibers and all sorts of stuff. What else? Sometimes people add notes to it, right? They add their own stuff to it so it gets handwriting. Yes. Yeah, and sometimes it gets twisted just because of how the copy machine does its thing, right? So we'll stop right there. So what I have in front of you, and I'd like for you to, if you could possibly get into groups of 3. There's a deck of cards that are in front of you. And what I'd like for you to do is to engage in groups of 3, if possible, and have discussions about these cards. And I'll give you about 5 minutes, roughly about a minute a person. So, yeah, if you can do it. You can do a group of two, that's fine. But there are questions, and I'll give you about 6 minutes to go through these questions and just answer. So, however you see fit. I'll see you back in 6 minutes.
Were you doing non-Norwegian or are you Norwegian?
Oh, well, I always felt weird when
What do you want to say? Yeah, I would say
Well, and that's what I you know, when we do our it's not just wow, it's not just where you are, not all sorts of different things. Yeah. So I don't know if they're out there and I don't relate it back, you know, I mean, I grew up in that area, but I don't really have to take my sister back in that house. Liberal, family where kind of the idea, my other family was calling, or maybe social justice was emphasized, so like, for my parents, it was really, not only children, but kids and other extended family members, but other people in the community, and kind of like working for equal opportunity for African Americans. My I don't know if people need to know. I mean, it's like, and I think really is the fact that we But it's human nature that if you're, if you see, like, you know, whatever, very assertive, by stereotype. And then that's normal, but then you get to like, you know, you see it go
They're doing well. Game over. So.
We didn't get very far. We didn't get very far.
You didn't get very far?
We got very deep.
We got 2 questions.
No, it's okay. You got 2 questions? All right. Cool. So as you were going through those cards, were there some questions that were kind of tough for folks, or maybe questions you hadn't thought about before? No?
They're all.
You think they were all hard? Okay.
Yeah, for different reasons, for different people.
Okay, for different reasons, for different people. So for you, as a person, which of those did you find challenging or hard, and why?
I think the question about the start time of it sort of brought me back to Grace, where I was one of very small numbers of school. I was constantly aware, and I would say a very part of that work, where I was aware of my being all the time, even though culturally I was not in.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was on the elevator coming down. My daughter's upstairs. It's coming down, and a guy who looked Somali, right? He looks at me and he says, "What country are you from?" I said, "Chicago." And then that really threw him off. He was like, "That's not." I'm like, "I know. I'm from here." But he thought I was something, and I thought he was something, but I don't think he was what I thought he was. But he thought I was, right? And so, I think it's interesting that sometimes we carry around this stuff. And it's important for us to remember some of those early days, right? So thank you for sharing that and being vulnerable with it. Thank you. Other folks about these questions, what do you think?
I mean, Amber and I, we both have 8-year-olds, and her son is 9 right now, and he's 4 and 6. I guess raising kids right now, I mean, I guess our kids, when we talk about, don't see things. I mean, my daughter goes to a small town school in 2nd grade. She doesn't see things. No. And I hope it stays that way. And we're both thinking that kids that, doesn't matter, everybody's a person. And I hope every other parent is raising their kids that way, but I unfortunately know they're not. But I guess for an eye, that's what we talked about, our 2nd or 3rd graders, raising them in how.
Yeah. Important stuff. Let's do this. Let's go to the front cover of your handout, right? And I want you to count the number of triangles in that diagram at the bottom. Count the number of triangles. So how many triangles are there? So somebody said 2. 5. 8. 9.
2, 0, 9.
You see 9.
Is Pac-Man is greater than.
That's true.
So let's back away from that, right? Because to your point, there are no triangles.
Wait, otherwise.
Because what defines a triangle? 3 sides, right? There's no in that thing.
But I'm imagining mine.
And why are you doing that?
You hate that.
You hate Pac-Man? Right? Because our brain, so this is called gestalt psychology, where we close the gaps on things. And so one of the things I would suggest is that when we talk about this idea of having a racial consciousness, that we actually talk about what is really there, because if we don't, we make stuff up, right? So my daughter is, my wife is American Indian, my daughter is biracial. She's a nice blend of the two of us in terms of her skin tone, and so she came up to me one day and she said, "Dad, you're black." And I was like, "Okay, I'm not sure how she came to that, but cool." And I said, "Yeah, I am." And I said, "And so what are you?" And then she looks at me and she says, "I'm skinny." And I was like, "Huh?" Right? She said, "Yeah, I have skin. I am skinny." Right? She's 4. Right? She's 4. And I'm glad that she's seeing that. Simultaneously, I also have to give her tools to deal with the world that just being skinny isn't enough, right? Because as much as our family wants to just be skinny, the world doesn't treat us skinny, right? So, make sure I don't go over time. So we had an incident. I don't know if anybody's been to IKEA. IKEA is one of my favorite places in the world. It's the most European place I can go in the Twin Cities. And just feel so European, right? So we go there for meals. And my daughter is a gregarious little 4-year-old. She says hi to everybody. She knows. I have to teach her about stranger danger or whatever, right? So we get the Bernstein Bears, I don't know, but anyway. So she has everybody is her friend, and it's really sad to see how white children don't know what to do with my daughter. And part of it is developmental, and I get it. But the other part is how do those parents develop their kids to be able to play with my little daughter? So I think it's important to show him. So I was in a session and the parent said, "Well, what curriculum do I use to teach my kids about diversity?" And I snickered, because you don't. You show them, right? And you don't show them with a lesson, you show them with your life. Who are your friends? Who's at your dinner? What magazines? What movies? Where do you go? Because they listen more to your life than they do to your lectures, right? And so when we think about this diversity, equity, and inclusion stuff, who are we including in our lives, right? Because many of these things that we're encountering is not our fault, but it is our responsibility. So let's go to the second page in your handout. Second page in your handout. 4 truths about human beings. People can learn, change, and grow. True? Yes. Do we have to see evidence of that for that to be a truism? No, we don't have to see evidence to know that people can learn, change, and grow. Right? Seeds, for all things considered, you put them in the ground. You don't watch them every day to see if they grow. You know the process works, and it will come up. People do what they think works, even when what?
I'm sorry.
People do what they think is effective. They think works, even when what? Even when it doesn't work, right? And do they ask your permission to do the thing before they do the thing that's not effective? No, they don't, right? But why do people do things that aren't effective? Why do they keep doing ineffective things? Because they think it's effective. But why do they think it's effective?
Because other people did it and found what? Success. It at least worked once, right? So we'll have, teenagers, how do you use, what is your, it was funny, in EPIC, this was one of the questions in EPIC. What is your contraceptive method? And one of the choices was pull out. I was like, what? But for some people, that's what they, and why would they do something that we all laugh and giggle about? Because they found success in it, right? And so did they ask our permission for that? No, they didn't, so they just do those things, right? So all human behavior is also goal-directed. And we'll talk about the goals of human behavior. And lastly, an attitude is a reaction to a goal. It is not a thing. It is a side effect. It is a clue. So if you encounter someone with a bad attitude, don't get sucked up in the attitude. Ask, what is that a side effect of? Or what is the clue that behavior is giving you, right? Anybody have a teenager in your life? Remember being a teenager in your life? Right? Yeah. So a teenager comes up to an adult and says, adult, I want to go to Marcia's party. It starts in 5 minutes. Can I go? And what does a reasonable adult say? No. No, right? And then they go into this whole thing. That's irresponsible of you. You're supposed to, who plans a party at this time of the day at the last minute and blah, 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 blah. You go into all this stuff. What happens to the kid's attitude? Goes in the toilet, right? They get huffy and go to their room and all sorts of stuff. The adult says, you know what? Marcia needs my daughter. My daughter's a good influence on Marcia. She's going through this acne thing, so I'm going to let her go to the party. So the parent knocks on the door and says, get your stuff. You can go to the party. You can't stay the whole time. I'll drop you off, pick you up. And what happens to the young person's attitude? It changes. Why? Because they got what they wanted. So when we see a negative or bad attitude, what is that a clue about? Somebody is not reaching their goals, right? And so when we see a good attitude, we recognize people are reaching their goals. So if I want to be helpful to someone who has a bad attitude, what should I be looking for and how can I help them? I should be looking and asking for their goals and helping them to reach their goals. Now, if I can do it, I will. If I can't, then what becomes my job? To help them find new goals, right? So all human behavior is goal-directed. So what are the goals of human behavior? There are 3 things. They're looking for safety, significance, and belonging, right? Why do kids join gangs? Because they're looking for safety, significance, and belonging, right? Why do, and I'll go as far as to say this as well. Outside of the neurological confine, the neurological issues around that, why do people seek out risky behaviors? Why do they engage in risky behaviors?
Usually fun.
Because they're looking for safety, significance, and belonging, right? So somehow they believe that those risky behaviors will help them reach those goals, right? Do they ask our permission? No, they don't ask our permission, right? And so what we have to recognize is that these are the things that they're after, but with those risky behaviors, is it the goal that is problematic, or is it the behaviors that are problematic? It is typically the behaviors. And if I understand what their goal is, then we can negotiate those behaviors. So is there, kid, you want to join a gang because you're missing out on safety, significance, and belonging? Is there another way to get you safety, significance, and belonging outside of participating in this gang, right? Is there another way to get you safety, significance, and belonging without using or engaging in these risky behaviors, right? So if we look at that, we can recognize that all human behavior is goal-directed. So let's go to this chart right here at the bottom. And what I'd like for you to do is to talk about what you learned or what are some of the conversations you had in your growing up. And that can, however you want to use, whatever time frame you want to use for that, whatever scope you want to use for that, is up to you. But I want you to do this in a very particular kind of way. On the left-hand side are groups that try to give you information about groups across the time, right? So the groups on the left-hand side are parents and family, friends, school and workplace, TV and movies, and your personal experience. The groups across the top would be your race, your gender, Native Americans, people with disabilities, GLBTI, and other faith communities, right? So what I'd like for you to do is tell me what you learned from those people on the left. And I want you to do it in a particular kind of way. I want you to put a plus if you learned something positive. I want you to put a minus in the corresponding box if you learned something negative. And I want you to put a 0 if it was never anything that you talked about growing up. If it was never anything you talked about. You can have pluses and minuses in the same box, but the size of your plus and the size of your minus will dictate how much you learn. So a big plus means lots of positive, and a small minus means a little bit of negative. All right? Yes.
It has to be something you verbally talk about, and only.
However you want to crouch what you picked up.
And only childhood, not.
However long, yeah, whatever scope you want to use. All right, I'm going to stop right there just for a second. And I want you to reflect on your chart. And this is your self-assessment. This is for you to kind of ponder and think about how you got information about the world around you and what you want to do with that information. But as you were going through those pluses, minuses, and zeros, was there anything that came up for folks as you were thinking about those things? Anything pop up? What's that? So as what was your thought process as you were going through putting pluses, minuses, and zeros? Yeah.
I was kind of thinking, wow, we never talked about
What? You were like, wow, we really never talked about a lot of these things in real discussion. Okay. Other folks, what was your thought process as you were going? Yes.
I was thinking that my family thought, and so I was just thinking how proud I was that really everything was talked about, and how little was talked about at school.
Wow. Okay. How little can you talk about in school?
I was thinking about the impact of that.
Okay. So a lot of impact was nonverbal. Correct. Yeah, you can see the behaviors more so oftentimes than actually having a conversation about that. Right? Yes.
And I was actually thinking that, wow, my family, we talked a lot. But we actually talked very positive
Okay.
about all of these.
Right. Okay. Cool. Now, I just selected a few that we could use this. If you continue this on, you can add more categories and whatnot. But I want this to be a self-assessment for yourself. So you recognize what you know you don't know, and your blind spots, and where maybe those have come from. Because when we talk about being inclusive, the first thing you have to do is include yourself, right? So you have to know where you come from and what your place is in the world. Lastly, we're going to page 6 and page 7. I have about a minute and a half, and I'll do that. Because one of the things that we're looking for is this idea of equity, right? And many of us have seen those pictures, the difference between equality and equity. Equity is giving everyone the same thing. Equality is giving people what they need. but inclusion is actually reducing or eliminating barriers that are unnecessary, right? Eliminating barriers that are unnecessary. Some barriers are necessary, but we have to look at the ones that are unnecessary. And what we want to do is also look at the individual. That's why we talked about commonalities and differences. Because pay equity would say that a man makes $1 and a woman makes 75 cents to that one man's dollar. But once you add race to that, it changes the whole chart, right? So an African American man does not start off with a dollar; it starts off with less, right? An Asian woman starts off with a higher amount than the average woman. And so when we talk about that pay equity,